Are we ready to go back to a 1950s style nuclear world? This is Breaking History. Hey, Mark Trahant here. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Breaking History. Before I go on, do me a favor. Take a minute and comment. I really do want to hear from you. Share this video, and most important, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Let's start with a quick detour. Last week's elections. I've been wondering for a long time when we would get a blowout election, one so decisive that it ends some of the debate for a while. We did not get that in the last presidential election. The Republicans won. They won enough seats to run the government, the Congress, the White House, and, of course, the Supreme Court. But that did not happen in a majority swing. Donald J. Trump earned 77 million votes to 75 million votes for Kamala Harris, 49.8% to 48.3%. In other words, very close. But the idea of a blowout grows as we near next November and the midterm elections because it allows us to make some difficult decisions about debt, an aging population, and even who pays the bills. Last Tuesday was a full sweep, including a 50.4% win for Zohran Mamdani in a three-way race, and even larger double-digit margins in New Jersey and Virginia. Before I go on, I cringe every time Mamdani is pegged as a Soviet-style communist. He is nothing of the sort.
The sun may have set over our city this evening, but as Eugene Debs once said, I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity. My friends, we have toppled a political dynasty.
Democratic socialists have a track record around the world. Spain, Portugal, at one point France, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and so on and so on. The crazy fears that are expressed about a repressive regime in the Big Apple are just nonsense. There is also an interesting story here. At the end of the Gilded Age, Henry George was the Mamdani of his time, striking fear from Wall Street, the Upper East Side, and the establishment candidate, eventually from Tammany Hall, won that race and was able to rally. George took second, followed by a young Theodore Roosevelt in third. But here's the thing. George's book, Progress and Poverty, helped shape the ideology that ended the Gilded Age and launched us into the progressive era. The task now for Mamdani will be to govern effectively, putting to rest the silly ideas, casting him as a far-left despot. So that brings me to another story I've been thinking about, and that's a return to the 1950s-style nuclear world. In fact, it sounds connected when you think about it. I grew up in the nuclear West. My grandfather worked for the Atomic Energy Commission, and at one point in his career, he drove around in a specially equipped security vehicle escorting the transfer of nuclear materials from one site to another. He only told me about this part of his past after he read a piece that I wrote about the transfer of hydrogen bombs. I went to Tantac's plant in Amarillo, Texas, and followed an H-bomb on the freeway as it was trucked to Albuquerque, New Mexico. From there, they're distributed across the world. The convoys back then were called Safe Secure Transports, and the trucks were unmarked. The program is now called the Office of Secure Transport. They basically have three primary locations: Albuquerque, Amarillo, Texas, and Oak Ridge. In my grandfather's day, the security team had a blacked-out station wagon with mounted machine guns.
Since 1947, the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, and its predecessor agencies have moved nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons components and special nuclear material by a variety of commercial and government transportation modes. In the late 1960s, the Albuquerque Operations Office was directed to expand its transportation system to provide protection to all shipments involving special nuclear material. An increase in political acts of violence prompted a review of procedures for the safeguarding of the materials. In 1975, the Office of Secure Transportation was established, and responsibility for nuclear weapons transportation was transferred to the Albuquerque Operations Office of the Atomic Energy Commission, predecessor to the Department of Energy.
Today, the security system is much more significant, including, I'm told, an immobilizing chemical that could be used to deter an attack. The convoy includes special SUVs with enough weapons to really win a small war. I'm thinking about this because of President Trump's statement last week that it's time to begin nuclear testing again. Decades ago, I had the opportunity to tour the Nevada test site, and the process itself is fascinating. It's now called Nevada National Security Sites. I went down more than 1,000 feet in one of the shafts where there was an underground lab. When I went down that shaft, one of the things that really intrigued me is I was writing about Yucca Mountain and the possibility of where we're going to store all of these nuclear materials. And the curious thing was there's this shaft that went as deep as I was in. And then we went to the top of the shaft, and the engineer explained how part of the year the air comes out and part of the year air comes in. And I asked him why that is from a geological perspective. And he really didn't know, but when I thought about it, it immediately to me sounded like the earth is breathing. And it really gives this idea of life that we don't understand. And so that's an aside note, but I really was fascinated by that when I was down in that underground lab. When we think of the nuclear West, tribal nations have just experienced so many significant health issues because of nuclear testing in the past. As the Wilson Center put it in a paper last year, it's hard to overstate the negative impact of uranium on the Native American community. In 1951, the first nuclear weapons field test took place on Shoshone land in Nevada. Over the next 40 years, almost 1,000 more nuclear tests took place on Shoshone territory. Between 1951 and 1992, nuclear tests conducted on Shoshone land caused 600 kilotons of nuclear fallout, more than 40 Hiroshima bombs. The resulting impact on tribal populations are widespread and well documented, including the doubling of cancer rates within the Navajo Nation from the 1970s to the 1990s. The return to a nuclear West is already taking place in Arizona and Utah, where uranium mining has become a priority. So much so that even areas near the Grand Canyon are being pushed. As the Grand Canyon Trust puts it, uranium mines and mining claims outside park boundaries threaten to pollute the most remarkable gorge in the world. So we should not be at all surprised about this call to test nuclear weapons again. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 said as much. The government should be ready to conduct nuclear tests in response to adversary nuclear developments if necessary. Trump is following the script. He framed it as such on CBS 60 Minutes last Sunday.
Less than an hour before your meeting with President Xi, you posted on social media that you instructed the, quote, Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons immediately. What did you mean?
Well, we have more nuclear weapons than any other country. I think we should do something about denuclearization. And I did actually discuss that with both President Putin and President Xi. We have enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world 150 times. Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons, and China will have a lot. They have some, they have quite a bit, but
so why
they
do
don't
we
have
need to
any
test our nuclear weapons?
Well, because you have to see how they work. You know, you do have to. And the reason I'm saying testing is because Russia announced that they were going to be doing a test. If you notice, North Korea is testing constantly. Other countries are testing. We're the only country that doesn't test, and I don't want to be the only country that doesn't test.
Are you saying that after more than 30 years, the United States is going to start detonating nuclear weapons for
I'm
testing?
saying that we're going to test nuclear weapons like other countries do, yes.
But the only country that's testing nuclear weapons is North Korea. China and Russia are not.
No, Russia's testing
So
nuclear weapons.
my understanding
And
is
China's testing them too, you just don't know about it.
that would be certainly very newsworthy. My understanding is what Russia did recently was test essentially the delivery systems for nuclear weapons, essentially missiles, which we can do that, but not with nuclear
Russia's
warheads.
testing and China's testing, but they don't talk about it. You know, we're a open society. We're different. We talk about it. We have to talk about it because otherwise you people are going to report. They don't have reporters that are going to be writing about it. We do.
On Air Force One, the president was even more direct about what other countries are now doing. They seem to all be nuclear testing, Trump said. We don't do testing. We halted it years ago. But with others doing testing, it's appropriate that we do also. And that's just the opening. Russia said it would resume its nuclear testing too.
National news now. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has ordered his government to submit proposals on the possible resumption of nuclear weapons testing. This follows, of course, President Trump ordering the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons tests for the United States.
I think the context is important here. President Trump is clearly talking about testing the way most of us think about it. But also on Sunday, the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, walked that back.
I think people have a lot of questions about how this is all going to work. You mentioned that a lot of the nuclear weapons are older. The last time the U.S. did a nuclear test, I was 5 years old, so I had to Google this. It was at the Nevada National Security Site underground. Is that where these new tests are going to be?
I think the tests we're talking about right now are system tests. These are not nuclear explosions. These are what we call non-critical explosions. So you're testing all the other parts of a nuclear weapon to make sure they deliver the appropriate geometry and they set up the nuclear explosion.
For once, I hope the president listens to his advisors, including the Energy Secretary. Then again, non-critical testing sounds benign. It's not. There are so many problems associated with even limited nuclear testing. The publication Arms Control Today says that the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty prohibits nuclear explosions. Not 1 kiloton, not 1 kilogram, not 1 milligram of yield, but zero yield. This provision applies to both fission and fusion explosions. The treaty, however, is less clear about what constitutes a nuclear explosion. This is how the process works. Sometimes parts are tested, or performance can be measured by dropping a bomb or launching a missile with an inert warhead. Basically, weapons are tested right up to the point of firing a high explosive. There are other tricks as well to keep testing secret from detection by other nuclear powers. It's a ruse, really, a cloak of invisibility, because it's only a little testing. It's worth noting how little is gained from nuclear testing. As the Brookings Institution pointed out in 1997, the real issue is not whether the 12,000 nuclear weapons now in the U.S. stockpile will explode, but whether they will explode at their designated yield. Brookings said, in the long history of nuclear arms, only 7 tests have fizzled, either failing outright or exploding at a yield lower than predicted. The point being that the goal is to never use nuclear weapons, so a minor reduction in explosive power doesn't really mean that much when the objective is to not use it anyway. Then the self-proclaimed warrior president probably doesn't share that ideal. Thanks for watching. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Also, I love the comments. Thank you, and keep them coming. And share this content or any of the content from Indigenous House. This is Breaking History. I'm Mark Trahant.